Okay. Takes us right into this item D, the Stage 3 drought update.
And Ms. Dyer will also be presenting this item.
Dyer?
Okay. All right, Stage 3 drought update. So our outline is to review the status of the drought, our demands, and our water supplies. We have various water supplies, including Gibraltar, Kachuma, imported water, groundwater, recycled water, and desalination. And a brief update on our funding activities. And we don't have a recommendation today, so that should not be in the outline. The drought status, so we are still in a drought in this area. The rest of California has had some reprieve, and local conditions can vary. So even on this map within the county, there may be some variations. The South Coast remains in a drought emergency, and the North County has larger groundwater basins and has had less severe drought impacts. Just wanted to remind everyone what we just experienced. It was a 5-year record low drought. So I put up for comparison various historical drought periods. So in 1947 to 52, which was our historic design drought, we had 105 inches of rainfall at Gibraltar. Then in the more recent drought we experienced 1986 to 1991, that 5-year period, we had about 93 inches of rainfall. We just went through a 5-year period where we only had 63 inches of rainfall at Gibraltar. So definitely a historic drought with record low rainfall, and something to keep in mind. As I think with the grand jury report and managing Kachuma supplies, this was a significant drought, and I think we were pretty successful in making it through very challenging circumstances. So this is a chart showing Kachuma storage. The green line is from the last major drought, the 1986 to 92, 93 period, and the black line is our most recent drought. And so as soon as Kachuma stopped spilling, which the last time it spilled was in May of 2011, the city knows that that could be the beginning of a drought period. That's our trigger when we really start tracking and monitoring what's happening, because we know we may be entering into a drought. So as you can see, the water levels at Kachuma matched fairly closely from where they were the last time around, despite less rainfall and also despite more environmental requirements. We had fish releases this time around that did not exist in the last drought. And then you can see after 5 years, in the last drought, there was some reprieve. This was the March miracle that filled up Kachuma. This time around, we went one more year before we received any reprieve, and this was the February rain event we had this year. This little dip right here over the summer last year was when the downstream releases occurred. There was significant outflow from Bradbury Dam when the downstream releases occurred. Had those not happened, the lake levels would have remained pretty steady. This chart shows our water demands over the last 12 months, and in the month of June, we had a 43% reduction in water use compared with 2013 water demands. So we are still at our 38% 12-month running average, which is well above our target. So we're very appreciative for all the efforts of the community to conserve water. This is our total water production going back to the 1980s. So you can see here we are, our water use is just about the same as where it was at the low point of the last drought. And this is a new chart. I think I'll have to increase the font size for the next time around, but it's showing our water use going back to 1897. the early 1900s. So the red line is our water production, and you can see it kind of steadily increases until about the 80s. And then since the 80s, it's been going down. And now our water use is roughly what it was back in the 50s and 60s. The green line is our population. So you can see our population has actually just about doubled since that time frame. So pretty fascinating to see that our population has just about doubled, but our water use has not. This is our supply strategy, no changes since last month. We are currently using our Gibraltar water, and water quality remains good. So this year we're pulling Gibraltar as much as we can, and we're holding on to our Kachuma allocations for use next water year. And I'll go through each of the water sources, the status of each of the water sources. But just a reminder that we're in the 6th year of drought. We have a 30% conservation target. Our water supply mix is made up of a portion of desal. State water is the orange bar. Groundwater is the yellow bar. We have shut our wells down, so that represents groundwater use earlier in the water year. The light blue bar is Gibraltar. The dark blue is Kachuma, and then the purple is recycled water. So Gibraltar is currently at about 83% of capacity. That's 4,400 acre feet roughly. It stopped spilling in early May. As I mentioned, we continue to use Gibraltar, and the water quality has remained good. Kachuma is at about 50% of capacity. Fish releases have resumed. We're not able to they're going through the Hilton Creek emergency backup system currently. And we have a 40% allocation for this current water year. The next water year begins October 1st, and we expect that the Bureau will allocate an additional 40% at that time. So we'll have roughly 80% of a normal year allocation starting October 1. Not all water stored in Kachuma is project water. I'll go through a chart later in this presentation that illustrates the small piece of the pie that represents our water. And just a heads up that downstream releases are expected to occur this summer. We've heard from the Santa Ynez Water Conservation District that they plan to release all of the water that they have. It's just about 20,000 acre feet roughly that will be released. So that'll be a significant release that occurs this summer. So I'm sure they'll send out a press release before that happens. And then the Whittier fire, which has been on everyone's minds, I wanted to just describe briefly what that means for our water supply. So this is the website to find out very frequent updates on the incident, Whittier Fire Incident Management System. And as of yesterday, the fire was 75% contained and had burned 18,395 acres. This is a map of the Whittier fire extents. And as you can see, it is all along the shores of Kachuma. So this entire area right here, the next time that it rains, it will present a problem for us. All of the soil, really because all of the vegetation has been burned up, then the soil will run off into Kachuma and cause water quality issues, and also the loss of storage capacity. So when rain returns next winter, we are anticipating that we'll have water quality issues, and a burn area emergency response report is being prepared by the U.S. Forest Service with some recommendations. City staff will be evaluating response options, anticipating the water quality issues next winter. And so that's what we'll be doing in the coming months to try and prepare for that.
Quick question on. So obviously there's concerns with water quality, but I had somebody ask me how much regarding putting the fires out. They're obviously pulling water from Kachuma for Whittier and potentially for is it Alamo as well. How much water are we talking about? Where does it come from? In this slide, how does that get accounted for?
As
How
I
much?
understand, the water, it came from a combination of pulling water out of Kachuma and also from potable water hydrants that were available. And I don't know if, Ms. Taylor, you want to speak to that?
This past week, I had the opportunity to go out and visit the Whittier Fire with our fire chief, Pat McElroy, and actually they were pulling water from the ocean as well. So they were pulling the water from many sources. And that one map Ms. Dyer showed, it unfortunately doesn't show where the Kachuma's intake is. The fire did burn right down to the intake, and it's really concerning. I'm not sure. The amount of water they actually use, it's buckets, so it's not compared to how big Kachuma is. And they used a lot of Phos-Chek with the planes that really helped make a difference on it. But I encourage all of you to go back and look because it's very devastating. The mountains have been denuded, and the runoff that's going to happen, it's going to be devastating. Next week, Ms. Dyer mentioned the BEAR team, the Burned Area Emergency Response Team. I've been in contact with their leader, and I have a Kachuma Operations Maintenance meeting next week, and one of the representatives is going to come talk to us and about our concerns, and hopefully we can get any of our concerns that they might not be addressing into their final report. But that'll be a big work project for us in the coming year.
I just drove through there yesterday. It's pretty bad. I mean, it almost looks like it's been snowing up there or something. There's so much ash on the ground up there. So it's going to be a mess when it rains.
And then what about water quality impacts regarding the fire retardants that were dropped? Are we worried about those getting into our water quality?
Well, we're always worried about anything in our water quality, but in what we've seen in our previous fires, which was the Zaka fire and the Ray fire, and they both used the Phos-Chek, the impacts really to water quality have been primarily total organic carbon. That's the primary problem that we deal with. And right now I'm working with FEMA on claims for the Gibraltar damage, the storm damage from the Ray fire. So I imagine what I'm going through right now with the Gibraltar fire, which I went through with the Zaka fire at Gibraltar, will be similar to with the Kachuma and the Whittier fire. With the Gibraltar, we have never really saw the problems with the Phos-Chek, but again, it's the total organic carbons, because the total organic carbons are made of the solids and dissolved in solid carbons, and the dissolved is about 99% is dissolved. And so how do you keep that out of your water? And to treat that, it really increases our water treatment costs with what we have to do at the Cater Water Treatment Plant. And again, that leads to more disposal costs, and it's we imagine that our treatment costs will escalate next year. But the really concerning thing is how close the intake is to the burned area. So I think that will be a big point of discussion in the coming year for water agencies.
Mm-hmm. Just one other comment, I guess, regarding fire. It is part of the city's long-term water supply plan to support any type of vegetation management and sediment management in the watershed. Historically, many years ago, the city used to partner with the Forest Service to fund controlled burns. And then, as I understand, the Forest Service stopped supporting that type of management strategy and didn't fund it anymore, so the program went away. But perhaps, given all the fires that we've had, it's time to revisit that policy. It's something to consider. So just wanted to remind everyone that it is part of the city's long-term water supply plan to support vegetation management and sediment management. Okay, so this is the chart of Kachuma Reservoir. This is all the various accounts of water that exist. And so at the very top here is what we've been allocated for this year. That's our 40% allocation, the amount of water that's remaining. The light blue is the unallocated water, which will be part of our 40% allocation come October 1st.
Excuse me, that's 40% to all the project recipients or just the city? That bar?
Just to the 5 member units.
Okay.
And then this is the imported water that's in storage. There's about 5,300 acre feet of imported water in storage. Of that amount, the city has the most. It's about 2,300. The purple bar is the projected evaporation over a 3-year period. This is something the county wanted to add to this chart. And then there's a couple fish accounts. Here's the A&A and B&A accounts. So all of this water, the gray bar, is anticipated to be released this summer. And then there's the minimum pool. So that's the latest information on the different accounts within Kachuma. And the city's imported water available, we have 2,300 acre feet in Kachuma. We have about 3,400 acre feet in San Luis. With regard to our water debt, we did execute the water purchase with the city of Santa Maria, so that water has been transferred to the city of Santa Barbara, and we are using that to repay some of our water debt in addition to another 900 acre feet that we had scheduled. So that will bring our total water debt down to about 3,300 acre feet at this point. And we're currently maximizing delivery to Kachuma, but in the coming months, we're going to be evaluating whether we reduce those deliveries. And I'll explain more about some of the thinking behind that. Our current average pipeline capacity for city use is about 280 acre feet per month. So with regard to management of imported water, there's a number of considerations that we think about before we send water to Kachuma. For one being the cost. So when we deliver water to Kachuma, it's an additional $282 per acre foot. That's the variable cost to convey water from San Luis to Kachuma, plus the value of the purchased water, which has averaged about $900 per acre foot. So we want to make sure that when we send that water, it can be used for water supply purposes and that we're reducing the risk of losing it. So some of the questions we might consider is San Luis at risk of spill? At this point, we know it is. We know that next year it's most likely going to spill like it did this year. It's pretty full. And so everyone's trying to move their water out of San Luis at this point. We can consider sending it to Kachuma. We could use it to repay some of our water debt at AVEC. And there are also groundwater banking opportunities that we can consider. At this point, the city is both sending water to Kachuma and has also repaid some of the water debt to AVEC. I think we'll hold off on groundwater banking opportunities for right now, since that was our focus for this year, is repaying the water debt.
And that groundwater banking opportunities, that's in other areas.
Correct.
Right.
There are
Geographically.
opportunities. Irvine Ranch Water District. AVEC also has some groundwater banking opportunities, and then there's the semi-tropic. So there's and CCWA, the Central Coast Water Authority, has facilitated finding these opportunities for us and has been really great bringing them to the table. And then member units of CCWA have participated in various banking programs, including the city. The city, prior to 2011, the San Luis was spilling, and the city put water at Dudley Ridge Groundwater Bank. And so it is something we're interested in pursuing, but right now we've been focused on paying off our water debt.
The water that's in San Luis right now, where did that come from?
Oroville is the key reservoir where our water originates.
But how did we physically get that water in there? Is that like
So
purchased water, table A water?
It's a combination. San Luis is a combination of our table A and our purchased water. None of San Luis Reservoir is about 2 million acre feet of storage, and it doesn't have a natural watershed. So all of that water is pumped in from north of the Delta. But it's a combination of our table A and purchased water.
Okay.
So, and I guess I'll just also mention, earlier in the drought, San Luis is really low. There was virtually no risk of spill at the time. So that's when we were really holding on to water in San Luis. It was a safe place to keep it. So we didn't want to send water if we didn't need it and incur those costs if we didn't have to of sending it to Kachuma. So another question we'll ask is this Kachuma at risk of spill? Next year, possibly. I mean, it went up 100,000 acre feet. It's been known to do that in 1 year. So the city is continuing to plan for continued drought conditions, but we should be aware also that water might spill next year. And imported water is the first to be lost if it does spill. And then finally, is there a demand for the water? So we don't want to send water too soon and then have it sit at Kachuma and evaporate before it can actually be used as a water supply. So that's something else we're looking at. And I just wanted to walk through a quick, this is, Kachuma evap is kind of a big issue. And so just wanted to show some numbers on our previous experience with this. Evaporation allocations to imported water actually increase as the lake level drops. It's somewhat counterintuitive because evaporation is measured in inches and applied to the surface area of the reservoir. So theoretically, evaporation is higher when the lake is more full because there's more surface area. So what we're seeing right here, let me just walk through the numbers. Last year, in May of 2016, total Kachuma storage was 28,000 acre feet. Of that amount, there was about 1,100 acre feet of imported water storage. The evaporation on imported water was 147 acre feet. So that was a 12%, almost 13% evaporation rate, which is 147 divided by 1148. Roughly 13% of the water evaporated. Now the reservoir is more full. It's 99,000 acre feet. Imported water storage is about 5,287. Evaporation allocated to imported water is actually 116. So even though there's more imported water stored, there's less evaporation allocated. And the reason is because of the formulas. There's all these different formulas in the contracts for which accounts evaporate when, and as the lake level drops, it's our imported water and our Kachuma carryover that pick up the entire evaporation of the lake. So that's what's happening is as the lake level drops, we see a higher percentage of our water lost to evaporation. So that's something we're always considering in the timing of when we send water. So on the left-hand side is an example of these are just for illustration purposes only. So on the left-hand side is deliveries to Lake Kachuma. That's an example where we send water every single month. Our initial storage would be 2,000 acre feet, and then it's deducted based on evaporation rates. Here we've assumed 12% evaporation and also the amount that was used for demand. So in this case, if we were to send water to the lake every month, we would have about 900 acre feet remaining in storage we would have met all of our demands on the system by doing that, but we'd have about 900 acre feet remaining in storage. On the right-hand side is looking at, okay, well, what if we hold off on sending some imported water for a few months? Here's our initial storage of 2,000. Our ending storage is at about 700. We were still able to meet all of our demands. So the only real difference is we have a slightly less amount of storage at Kachuma, really a drop in the bucket when you look at the total reservoir storage. But by not sending the water for those 4 months, we were able to save, actually 3 months, we would have saved 900 acre feet at San Luis that can be used for other purposes, either sending to a groundwater bank or repaying our water debt. And we also would have saved over $1 million in conveyance costs and the value of that purchased water that would otherwise just have been sent to Kachuma and evaporated before we could actually use it. So I think this has been, people always wonder, well, why aren't we maximizing delivery to Kachuma? It's because we're trying to we're balancing the cost of the water with the supply benefits. And in some cases, we don't want to send water if we're not going to have it for water supply. It's too expensive. It's one of our most expensive sources. So we want to manage it carefully. Any questions about that?
No, but quite enlightening.
So what's the process for those decisions? Is that a staff thing? Is that city council? Is that coming back to us?
It's a staff level decision on the management of our water supplies available to us.
Okay.
The groundwater basins, these are currently at historic lows, about 30% of capacity. No news at this point. It's going to take a while before they recover, but we do track it on a monthly basis. And our recycled water facility, it's remained in operation throughout the construction. It continues to meet all of the demands on the system. All construction modifications have been completed, and testing is underway. This is production testing to see what the capacity is operationally. So most likely that testing will continue through to September, and the city will pursue any legal action to recoup costs for design errors that required the modifications. Desalination project, major construction is complete. We're in startup and testing. So on May 30th was the first day that desalinated water was put into the system. Acceptance testing is currently in progress, and the production is intermittent as we work through the startup and testing phase. In terms of public outreach, we get a lot of questions about tours for the facility. The site is still busy with activity with startup, and so no public tours are being scheduled. Once the facility has successfully completed all the startup requirements, a public open house will be scheduled. For drought funding, so this is, we have Prop 1 water desalination grant program and potentially a $10 million project award for our desalination project. We are pursuing this grant and submitting an application that's due June 16th. So that's quite a bit of work effort to put these grants together. They're sometimes thousands of pages long. And the September 1, I'm sorry, I have the dates wrong. So June 16th is when the grant guidelines were released. September 1st is when the grant applications are due. And then November 3rd is tentatively when the state would when the award announcements come out. And early 2018 is when funding agreements will be executed. So we're really optimistic, and this would be a big deal if we were able to win this grant award. So we're working really hard to put that together.
Yeah, a question. Just real quick, I was reading something that said they're also going to pursue looking at grants for the feasibility study, the intake feasibility study, and other items. Is that like something separate or?
I'm not sure. Perhaps, Mr. Hamilton, do you know the answer to that? Our feasibility study was already funded through, and it went on to the loan that we have with the state. So I'm not sure if there's additional funding we're looking for feasibility studies.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Kilbourne, we aren't certain yet if we can pursue those aspects of the project. We're in discussions with DWR staff to see exactly what portions we can kind of parse out into these different areas. There's an environmental documentation portion as well that we'd like to pursue, but ultimately we're trying to get as much as possible.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure if we were precluded if you go for one or the other, but that's good that we're looking into it.
Okay. And that concludes our presentation.
Great, thank you. Any questions or comments? Good,
Mr. Chairman,
go ahead.
I keep pestering everybody with articles about paleo drought studies, and we noted that the celebrated grand jury document presented a series of worst droughts ever, which kept getting worse and worse, and I think that was an attempt at humor on their part. Ms. Dyer showed that of the 3 droughts that we have rainfall records for in the past century, those got consecutively worse. I think following the drought in all of the Southwest here in the last few years, we're going to see a lot of research coming on to the out regarding proxy studies like tree ring studies on paleo droughts in the Southwest. And the upshot, as everything keeps indicating, is that in what was called the medieval warm period from about 700 or 800 to 1300 dates, now called CE, Christian era, used to be called AD, there were very severe droughts, perhaps lasting more than a decade, and some of these are called the Anasazi collapse droughts because the cliff-dwelling cultures out in the Great Basin disappeared at that time, presumably due to those droughts. So in future drought planning, I think we ought to recognize that what we've seen perhaps is not the worst, and things could get worse, and we need to at least acknowledge that fact in the planning. And in our recent drought, as Ms. Dyer said, we did very well, but as I recall, when we went into it in the planning stages, and we were basing that on the 1950s drought, we did not include water purchases as one of our strategies, but that turned out to be very important in the end. So when we do future planning for drought strategies, we need to acknowledge that if things get worse than what we're using as our planning scenario, and we have to use something, that it will require getting creative and doing things that perhaps weren't anticipated at the beginning. Fortunately, we now do have desal, and I think we can trust that the ocean won't dry up. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much for the report. Okay. That takes us to item 7, the Water Resources Manager's Report.